Okay, well, we went to work for a company out of Torrance, California, which was the old Bone 24 then. And went to work there as the manager for production. And that was my first white shirt and tie job that I had. So worked there for a while. This is after I came out of the service. And ran into problems with the vice president of the company, who was a Spaniard. And you talk about prejudice, he didn't like Mexicans at all. So anyway, worked there for a while. I got in trouble with him and walked out on the job. And went down to the restaurant, to the Sunnyside Cafe, or Mexico City back then, and walked in, and the sheriff was there, Sheriff Stites. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I was working over here at the plant over there." I said, "And I just quit." "Can you quit?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, I said, "You know, I've always wanted to be a deputy sheriff. I've always wanted to be, that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a cop." He said, "Well, what are you doing tomorrow morning?" And I said, "Well, nothing that I know of." He said, "Well, come on down to the sheriff's department." He said, "I'll put you to work." He said, "We need a deputy. We just had one of the deputies retired," he said, after about 35, 40 years. And he said, "So I'll put you to work as a deputy." And I said, "Well, I don't have the education for a deputy." And he said, "Don't worry, we will train." So then the following day I went in and I told my wife, I got home and I told her, I said, we just been married a short time then. And she said, "You did what?" I said, "I quit my job." She said, "Well, my wife worked for Campbell Soup at the time, so in Napoleon, Ohio, and we lived in Morenci. So she said, "Well," I said, "But I got a job going tomorrow." I said, I got a job that I've always wanted. I said, "I'm going to be a deputy sheriff." She laughed. She said, "Sure you are." And I said, "Really?" I said, "I'm going to go to work tomorrow." So the next morning I got up, reported here to Adrian and to the sheriff's department, and he said, "Well, we'll get you measured, uniform, and all that." And then he said, "We'll put you to work probably next couple of days. You'll come in." He said, "We'll walk you through everything so you'll know where everything's at." And he said, "Then we'll start training you and put you on he said, "Well, I'm going to put you on patrols where you're going to go. You'll be a patrolman." I said, "Wow, that's great." So I was really happy. We had to get permits and everything back then, especially for guns. So in order to be a deputy sheriff, and we had to get also clearance. Back then, the man to talk to, if you wanted to get a job in the city of Adrian, and the man that knew everybody was Rufus de la Cruz, Sr., the older gentleman. He was great. He worked for a commercial bank, and he ran the elevator, the commercial bank, the old commercial bank, which is on the four corners behind the drugstore, on the four corners. There's commercial bank was there, in the alley. I don't know, Robert's Jewelry and that was there on one side, and then the alley was on the center. Commercial bank was right there. Well, Mr. De La Cruz, because he worked downtown and because he knew everybody, everybody that came into the bank, he ran the elevators up and down, and he met so many people. And whenever you needed someone that you wanted a job or something, you put him down to recommend you. And so I went over and talked to Rufus, and I said, I got a job now. I said, I'm going to be working for the sheriff's department. So, wow, he said, that's something. You'll be the first deputy Mexican police officer, not only a deputy, but first Mexican policeman, not only in the city of Adrian, but throughout Lenawee. So Anyway, I told him the story, and he said, well, I'm happy for you and all this. And I went to work for the sheriff's department. Little did I know that it was true. In the state of Michigan, there weren't any other Mexican deputies at that time. There weren't any. So I was something. I was kind of special being in the police force. Adrian City Police didn't have a Mexican yet. It came later. So I was with them probably a little bit less than 4 years for the sheriff's department. And went back and I told Mr. De La Cruz that I had an offer to be a bank officer for a commercial savings bank. And he said, well, that's a very prestigious job, a banker. He said, so you went from a deputy sheriff, he said, you're going to go into a banker now. He said, and they just moved the bank not too long before that to Maumee Street, so up by the Croswell Theater in there. So I said, well, I'm going to be an officer there, and I let him know that. He said, oh my gosh, you'll be working with Mr. McAfee, and he gave me the names of the officers, and he said, well, I'll tell him, well, you're a good person and all that. I said, well, I'm already in. I said, I've already been hired. So he said, well, okay. He said, but I'll still tell him, well, you're a good person. He said, you've always been a good young man. And not only that, he said, but you're educated coming out of the neighborhood. And when he said that, I kept thinking, how many of us not only graduated from high school, but how many of us have gone to college? Checking back, at that point, Raymond Cardenas had graduated from Adrian College, one of the first Latinos ever to graduate from Adrian College. And Raymond was an insurance agent on his own, and he moved to Coldwater and did extremely well, extremely well. Raymond became a very, very wealthy man in the insurance business. Also at that point, we had, there was Terrazas, the young man Terrazas, I can't think of his name, became a clerk for the city and all that bit, the city of Adrian. And there's also Perez that graduated from Adrian College, went into the Marine Corps and came out as I think he came out as a major in the Marine Corps. So not only went to work for Tecumseh Products, and he was the head of the international department. I think that's what his position was, graduate from Adrian College. So that was something to think about, because there weren't too many of us that had gone to college. The bank put me through the University of Michigan School of Banking, which was like a 3-year program, and it was a summer program. But all through the year you had monthly. You had to do monthly schoolwork in that and learn the banking business through back, we didn't have computers back then, but we learned through our books in that. And then we had to mail in our tests and all that bit. And then in the summertime we went there for 3 weeks, for 3 years. So, and then graduated from there. So I graduated from there. You had a picture there with my mother and dad when they attended the graduation, and my wife. So it was great to see us, the people that went on to college in that, to see us succeed and do well. So that's we're really proud of that. Not only were we proud of it, but our not our people, but our same the older people from the neighborhood in that, very proud of us. whenever they met you, I say, gosh, you're doing so well. Not only me, but if they ever saw any of the rest of the guys, they'd do the same thing, or the girls, whatever, went on to college. So very, very proud people. We're outstanding, like they said, you're outstanding, and especially being from Sunnyside. The biggest thing I guess was if you got out of Sunnyside and you went across the railroad tracks, you were successful. That was the thing that was all the time was always brought up. People that are successful move out of the neighborhood.
Can you tell me, did you get any extra responsibilities being a deputy who spoke Spanish? Were you given extra assignments or
Yes,
specialized duties?
One of the biggest jobs I had was to translate. They'd end up picking up migrants for stealing, or migrants for stabbing, or migrants for shooting, and they spoke very little English. One of the jobs I had was to go in and translate. Not only did I translate in the local areas around here. I mean, we're talking Monroe. I got very few calls from Lansing, but Coldwater was another one that we had people that were stopped and that didn't speak English. Jackson Police. We had to translate. Not only did we translate for the department, I translated for the departments, but I translated for the court system. We did a lot of translating for the court, and the thing with the court system was that the judge, we had Judge Martin back then, instead of sending them into prison and that, he'd say, let's call the Border Patrol and send these men back to Mexico, rather than put them in prison up here or do something with them. He'd always say, let's send them back to where they're from, because they have families back there. There's no sense of us putting them in here. They're not going to do any good to us here, going to prison. And he always joked about, I hope your translations were correct. And I said, I always told him, I said, well, if you need someone to check them, I said, you can bring someone else in and they can translate the scripts. So, and he always said, well, no, I trust you, and I trust your translating. He said, or else I wouldn't have you here. But so we did a lot of work on translating. A lot of times we were called to house situations, especially in the city, in Adrian. So Mexican people would be having problems or something, and the city would be called out there, and they'd call me to come out and please help us out and translate. Let's see what the problem was or what problem the lady was having. And it was always a common husband-wife ordeal that they were having, and straighten it out and talk to both of them and tell them what could happen if they continued. You could go to jail, and you could, end up having to pay whatever, so fines and costs. So my suggestion is straighten your household out, and I won't be back. I don't have to come back. But if I do come back, I said, then you probably will go to jail. So we did a lot of translation work. Did some public work also to help out in different situations where they needed the hospital. I remember one case where they had a pregnant lady come in, a Mexican lady, and they needed a translator. And they said, well, who can we call? They had a couple ladies that were nurses there, but they spoke English, Spanish kind of broken, and couldn't translate too well. So back then, but they called and they said, we need you up at the hospital now. So go up there and translate at the hospital for different people that came in and needed help. So yeah, we did not only the police work, but the community helped out too. I tell the story about the state trooper that they brought in from Arizona. A Mexican state trooper came in, and they said, we'll assign him to the northern part of the state from Lansing up. He can handle that if they need any translators or Mexicans to translate whatever languages or whatever. And we got Cruz on this other side. So he was great. He was a great trooper, and so we worked both sides till things started to change for us. They started allowing troopers, Mexican descent troopers into the state. I know that in Hillsdale we had a Mexican deputy, and right after I left, probably after I left Adrian, probably 2-3 years, they had a Mexican deputy, or Jimenez, and he was great. He was a good deputy sheriff. They also started getting police officers here that were Mexican, Spanish speaking. So Zeke Torres became a deputy sheriff after that. So they started. I think what happened was that somebody needed to open the doors, and by an act of God, I was one that opened doors for a lot of people, a lot of young people that were saying, how did you become a banker? How did you become a deputy? What do you need to do these things? And the answer always was education. In order for us to get ahead, not only in Adrian, but throughout the United States, we need to continue education. We need continuous education. There's so much need for Spanish-speaking doctors, Spanish-speaking lawyers. There's so many fields, the medical fields, that you need Spanish-speaking people. And it's a proud moment when my wife and I would come into Adrian and we go to City Hall. We go to the courthouse, and there's Mexican descent people working there, young ladies or young men working, and you see all that and you think about it and you say, well, and that was the beginning. That was the beginning way back. We might have suffered some by all the things we had to go through in Adrian, not only Adrian, but throughout the United States. We had so much prejudice towards the Mexican people. We were only good for as migrants to pick and not even plant the plants. We had to pick the plants. So I remember being introduced as the outstanding Mexican from the city of Adrian that planted tomatoes. And I said, no, I had never planted tomatoes. I picked tomatoes. Yeah, that's the difference. I said so. But, that's just what it was. It was, we need people that, instead of picking the tomatoes, should have been planting the tomatoes. Somebody in charge that could do things. And the same thing, you can't do all these things without the education. There's so much to be said. In the neighborhood, going to Sunnyside. Years ago, I drove probably the best of cars. We were making money back then, lots of it, and my wife and I did well. I happen to have a nice Mercedes sedan parked in front of my tío Amado's house there, where we just went by a little while ago and checked the neighborhood. And I'll never forget this kid coming up, and wrapped around his bandana, wrapped around his head and all that bit. And he's walking around, and he's looking at the car. And he said, hey, you own this? And I said, yeah, I do. Man, he said, sell drugs? And I said, no, I don't. I said, no. I said, let me tell you something. There's money to be made out there without selling drugs. Did you go to school? Oh, no, man, I quit when I was 16 or whatever. I said, well, I'll tell you what, in order to get a car like this and be able to keep it, so it's yours, I said, you need an education. And that's where you're lacking right now. I said, you can sell all the drugs you want if you want, but drug business is a tough business. You'll get caught, and you'll end up with nothing. On the other hand, if you get an education and you do well for yourself in business or whatever, that's you can keep the car. You won't lose it. So, and I'll never forget that moment. That was because the first thing they see is a luxury thing, and they think, well, so and so sells drugs, and they're doing well, but they get caught. That's why you read in the paper, how many people got caught, and how many people go to prison. So, but if you want to keep your nice things in life, you got to go to college and get a good education. So, and that's my advice to the young people all the time.
You spoke about some hardships, having a Mexican background. Do you remember some of the incidents of discrimination or felt like you were being discriminated?
When we first came here back in the 40s, we didn't, when you're young, you don't leave the neighborhood much, okay? You go to school and you come back. But as you get into a higher part of the school, my prejudice things came in probably as soon as I started high school. And we'd get out of class, and I'd get invited by I call them my Anglo friends, and they'd say, let's go downtown and go to the fountain there and get a Coke or root beer float or whatever. And I said, well, okay. I started going with them right at the beginning, probably my freshman year at Catholic Central. And the first place we went to, we walked in, and the owner said, hey, he said, hey, you, and he pointed at me and he said, we don't serve Mexicans here. And I said, well, okay. Turned around and walked out, and two of my friends come out, and they said, well, what happened? And I said, well, they won't serve me here. Why? And I said, because I'm from Mexican descent. They said, really? And they went back and talked to the owner, and he said, no, I don't serve Mexicans. That was part of the beginning of some prejudice that I wasn't used to, because we weren't used to this. Of course, we didn't go to any of these places. My folks never. We had certain places in town we'd go shopping, or certain places. Matter of fact, we went to Toledo a lot to do a lot of our shopping. And but that was one of the first incidents that I remember quite vividly, because I just started in high school. So the other incidents were we like to go roller skating. Lupe Mendez and I would go out and we'd walk 5-10 miles to go just to a roller skating rink. And we went to the one on 52, which was the Illinois roller skating rink back then. And we walked in with our roller skates, and the manager or whoever was there had said, what are you guys doing? I said, well, we're going to go roller skating. It's not here. And we don't allow you in here. I said, wow, okay. So we found a roller skating rink called the Hilltop over on 223, which was right across from the Wigwam bar back then. And it was just an old roller skating rink. And from Sunnyside to there wasn't that far. We'd walk over there and go roller skating. I ended up getting the car probably I was 14, my junior year, my freshman year, I got a car. And we take the car and we go to Hudson. And found out that in Hillsdale there was a roller skating rink. Lupe had a girlfriend that moved over by Hudson, so we'd go out there. And so anyway, we said, well, let's take a ride to Hillsdale. And we went to Hillsdale. That roller skating rink got burned down and rebuilt. It's still there in Hillsdale. Still owned by the same man, Ernie Engels. So we got there and we went in and nobody said nothing. I mean, there was a thing said about us coming in. We put on our roller skates, paid our fees, and roller skated for an hour or two and then came home. Nothing was ever said. So we found out that maybe Hillsdale, we could go roller skating there. We could go roller skating up here at the Hilltop. The other thing that happened was in town here, in the city, we couldn't go to the Croswell Theater. Croswell Theater was where they brought in all the top movies, the top musicals, the best movies that came out were at the Croswell. So we went to we only had two movie places in town. One was called the Family Theater, and the Family Theater was mostly cowboy movies. Well, it's just, I guess, movies mostly for kids and that they showed at that time. So anyway, we could go to the Family Theater, and no problem there. We could go there, and so I ended up going to the Croswell Theater and talking to the manager and his wife, and I said, look, I like to see the nice musicals that are coming out back in the 50s. Is there any way you would allow me to come in and pay my fee and come in and see the movies that are coming out? And the man was very, very nice. They're husband and wife. And he said, well, pay your fee and you can go sit upstairs in the balcony. I said, really? He goes, yeah. He said, just make sure you go to the balcony, don't you go downstairs. I said, all right. So I'd go there, pay my fee. They got to know me quite well. And I got to see the best of movies that were coming out. But, other than that, you'd run into problems downtown with a lot of people that didn't understand you. And there was someone complaining, that the Mexican kids are here doing whatever. But there was quite a bit of prejudice back then. We were fortunate that the ones that graduated from school and all that, we were very fortunate that we went out and we got good jobs. And once we were I remember working in a factory back then, 2 factories back then, and working in the summer and then going to college in a regular term. And it was unbelievable. If you work too fast, the people would come out, the foremen would come out and say, well, you're doing too fast of a job, you need you to slow down or whatever. And so, but the prejudice part was, you knew where you could go. You knew that you could go to different places. And you were okay to go to. There was other areas of town that you weren't allowed. I became a banker, and I thought we could move to the west side. Talking to my friends, the realtors at that time, they said, well, we'd have a rough time trying to find you a house on the west side. But thank God for the president of the bank. He put me in a nice house on Toledo Street. So he said, we got a house for you, and we want you to move, and we want you to move to this house, and you're within 2 blocks of the bank, the 3 blocks, and you walk to work. You don't have to. So we ended up with a nice home, my wife and I, and talking to the realtors back then, they said, oh, it's going to be a while probably before we get any Mexican descent people that can move into the west side. I left the bank, and my compadre Trevino, Robert, and his wife bought a house on the west side. And so it didn't take too long, and they moved over there. I don't know if anybody else of the Mexican descent ever moved out to the west side, but I know they lived out there. So it's quite the prejudice part, I guess we were too young to understand it when we were young, and then after we learned more about why we weren't accepted because of our nationality and that, my gosh, the ones who became successful, we had no problems with that.
Tell me about the country club.
When I went to the bank, we automatically became members of the country club. Back then, the Elks, the Moose, country clubs, all that were off limits to Mexicans, Mexican descent. First part, when I joined the bank, they told me that as a banker, as an officer of the bank, my wife and I would belong to them. We had membership to the country club. Our first incident, we went out to the country club, and we went to a dinner, some dinner that was put on, and we were invited. So my wife was kind of bashful back then. She was kind of an introvert rather than an extrovert like I am. So we went out to the country club, and we get there, and it was kind of in the winter time or something when we went out. It was cold. I remember we had top coats, and we get there and wore the suit and the hat and all that bit, and the man, there's a black man, the man that took your coat and hat and all that bit out there, and he come up and he said, I'm sorry, but I can't take your coats in hand and hang them. He said, you have to be members here. And I said, well, we are members. I work for the bank. I work for commercial savings bank. Oh, he said, I don't know. He said, just about then, the bank president apparently he'd been watching for us to get there, and he come out and he said, he told the man, he said, from now on, whenever Mr. and Mrs. Cruz come in, you take their hats and you take their coats and you hang them. They are members here. And they will be coming here quite often. So you make sure that you take care of them when they come in. This is our first time that we went out there. So we go out, we sit down, and we're sitting there, and we're getting our drinks and whatever, and the kitchen door happened to be not too far from where we sat. And the door cracks open, and I hear this, mira, es Pin, that's Pin. And so I heard that Pin, that's my nickname in the neighborhood, so I turned around and looked. And there's about 3 or 4 ladies looking through the door, and they said, that's Pina and his wife. And they were apparently they must have been the cooks or the dishwashers at the country club. And they were really, really proud. I think they were proud just to have us, to see us there. And my wife says, boy, she says, that was something. She said, they got Mexicans working in the kitchen. And I said, yeah. I said, that was something. It was a time that I kept thinking, you know, we finally might have broke the barrier a little bit, because we ended up being members of the Elks Club. We became members of people. We could go any place, because I was a bank officer. It opened up a lot of doors for me. And so I ended up on different boards of the community. It was just a good time to open a lot of doors for our nationality. So behind me, there came a lot of other Mexican Americans that joined not only Elks. I'm sure some of them went to the country club. I know Bob Trevino and Sandy must have gone to the country club a lot, so like we did, because we had a lot of meetings out there, and a lot of golf excursions too. So it was quite a time. And that was part of our opening the doors and getting rid of this prejudice thing. And coming back, as we come back once in a while to Adrian, and seeing all the Mexican Americans working in different places, and doctor's offices, no matter where you go, they seem to be, in hospitals, at the court system. I had to go there and get some papers not too long ago, and the lady that waited with me was Mexican descent. So it's just great to see it. It's something that you know. And the thing is that kids today, I think they don't realize what we had to go through to get them to be accepted, to go there. Even the school systems, we had prejudice in schools back then, way back. I tell the story about going to St. Joseph's as kids, and the nuns would pull out the Mexican kids to shovel the snow. And I thought, wow, this is great. All of us Mexican guys were just great. We thought, this is fantastic. We don't have to go to class. We can be out here shoveling snow. Well, that's not why we were there. We weren't there for shoveling snow. We were there to learn. So by the time we got to high school, and they tried to get me to drive the Willow Run to pick up nuns and the Willow Run to take some nuns, I didn't accept it. I said, I'm sorry, but I can't do that. And they said, what do you mean you can't? I said, we need your help. We need you to go down and pick up Sister so-and-so. I said, that's not why I'm here. We had a priest, Father Van Antwerp, was our Spanish religious teacher at the time too. And he came over and talked to me, and he said, I understand you had disregard for the nuns. I said, no, Father. The reason I'm here is that I'm here to learn, not to be running to Detroit or Willow Run to pick up nuns and bring them back, or take nuns and deliver them. So that's not why I'm here. And he said, you're right. You're absolutely correct. Yeah. He said, we'll find someone else to drive. So that was part of that. That ended quite quickly.
You mentioned Mexican Americans. What name do you prefer using in terms to describe your heritage? Is it Mexican American, Chicano?
I've always, when I'm asked, since I was little, I was always taught that I was Mexican. we traveled a lot in through, when I was young, my parents took us through, well, even Texas. Texas spoke Spanish. So, but we went into Mexico a lot for relatives and that. But I was always taught that I was a Mexican, I was never a Hispanic or Chicano came good. That was a word that we still use, But I was always, when I was asked, I was always proud to say that I was from Mexican descent. As time went by, I realized that when I said Mexican, they always thought I was from Mexico. So in later years, I always said, well, I'm Mexican American, because I was born here. And I just had I went to work in the shop here not too long ago, and the young man, his grandparents lived in Sunnyside. That's where they first came to, from Texas. And I said, I noticed that on some of the sheets that they posted and that, it said, had his name on the bottom, and also his sister-in-law was from Mexican, well, the name's Mexican, so I said, so where are you from originally or what? And he said, well, I'm Spanish, and well, my great-grandfather and grandmother moved to Michigan, and they lived in Sunnyside. And I was shocked. I said, really? I said, I know the name, but I don't recall the family, I don't recall who they are in that. I said, but I heard of your family in that. I said, but they were Mexican. And he looked at me and he said, no, we're Spanish. I said, so your grandparents were from Spain, and if they were from Spain, and then of course they had your mom and dad and that, so they'd be Spanish, and that would make you Spanish too then, if you're. He said, no, my grandparents weren't from Spain, they were from Texas. So I try, to this day, I still think that a lot of them are ashamed of our heritage, and I don't know why. There's so much to be proud of. As Mexicans, we got so much history. I mean, you go to Mexico and you visit the ruins, the Mayan ruins, and you travel, and even if you travel into Guatemala like we have, and that the Mayans were just fantastic people. They created the calendars. They knew the time. I am so proud of being what I am. And yet you talk to these young people today and they say, well, I'm Spanish. Well, you're not. And it's hard to explain to them that they're not. They're from Mexican descent. They're Mexican Americans. And that's what we are. And you shouldn't be ashamed of what you are. I asked a man the other day, he said, are you Mexican? And I said, yes. I said, I am. I said, how come you guys are always asking them questions? I said, do people walk up to you and say, are you German? And he said, well, no. And I said, well, I said, some of us, I said, I've never been ashamed of what I am. So I said, that's what I am, I'm Mexican, from Mexican descent. But I said, my parents were all born here. Matter of fact, my wife's parents were from Texas. Her grandparents. They owned property and everything. And then when Mexico sold all the properties, Texas, Arizona, California, all that, New Mexico, and that to the United States, I said, all them people that were here, a lot of them stayed. They stayed in what they would call the United States, and it was annexed into the United States. I said, but you know, you look back at them and you say, well, they were born in Mexican territory, so but today I said, you know, all the descendants are still here. They're still around, and a lot of them. I said, I bring that up because I think that it's something to be proud of. Anyway, you just. I said, I'm proud. When we go down to Mexico and that, I try to see as much as we could about our people. My wife's from Aztec. You can tell by looking at her. She's got her Indian features, high cheekbones and everything. She's a beautiful woman. It's just unbelievable. You know, it's something to be proud of. And I think that saying that you're Mexican, there's no shame in that. There's no shame in saying what you are. And I think they need to learn that's what we are. You know, it's, how these other names came about, I have no idea. I don't know, Hispanic or
Latino.
You know, I always said, Latino. You know, so Latino. So it's quite a. I think that maybe for some reason or other the parents, you know, were ashamed of what they are or something. I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know where it came from or what. But I think in my family we were instilled that that's what we are. My family, my grandma, my grandpa, all that. They always said you're Mexican. That's what you are.
I don't have any other questions.
Did you have any other special duties as a banker because you could speak Spanish or you had a relationship with?
In the banking business, I ended up doing exactly what I was doing before, translating. We had a lot of Mexican people would come in and want a loan. They speak English very well. I tell you, the jobs that I had was people would come in. The thing is that I think when they have problems and they can't, how are they going to explain if they can't speak the English language as well? So they come in and they say, I need your help. This is my situation, this is what's going on. Can you help me? And that was part of the banking business. We were supposed to help the community out as bankers. If they needed help, medical or whatever, it was just a matter of picking up the phone and calling it and saying, I'm going to send so-and-so over for medical reasons. I had young men that would come in and say, I need a job. The power of the banker was so great that you could pick up the phone, dial the number, whatever, directly to a president of different companies here in Illinois, and say, this is so-and-so. I got a young man here I want to send over. I'd like you to see if you can place him someplace. And we could find jobs for him. We could get medical help for different doctors that we call them. It was, as a community, there were so many things that we needed to do to help. We had a lot of young kids, especially talking to the kids at school, going over and talking in front of them and telling them that the most important thing in their lives at this point is to get an education. And that went for all of them that you talked to in the classes. Once in a while we'd have a Mexican function or something, and I'd be the speaker at the Mexican functions. And they always told me, please try to enlighten, especially young people, because we need examples. And I just can't say enough. Try to help. Try to tell them what they need to succeed. I was successful all my life until a few years ago that we ran into a problem in a restaurant. And, we lost a tremendous amount of money, but it's only money. We have our health, my wife and I. So that's the other part is they have to learn to take care of their health also. Because boy, without that, you can't do anything. Without good health, you're finished. We've been very fortunate, my wife and I. We've both been healthy. She works. I'm 75 years old. I'll be 76 in a month. She just turned 75. And she's beautiful. I mean, she works and she's healthy. We have a few problems medically, but my God, today, anything that you need or from medically, they got something for you. They can take care of it for you. You know, I'm a diabetic. All I do is take my medicines on time and do my shots and all that, and I'm healthy. My wife had a pacemaker put in a few years ago, and she's just had a pacemaker battery replaced on the pacemaker. She's going great guns again. So, but it's a matter, I think, of telling the young people growing up, especially other groups. It doesn't have to be just Mexicans. It could be any other group. The needs that they need to succeed. And I really emphasize a lot on education. So without education, they're not going to get too many places. It's like that kid walking around the Mercedes-Benz and looking at it. He said, you know, you sell drugs. It doesn't take drugs to have good things. So.
One more thing, to kind of backtrack a little bit. So the
Okay.
project is called Germans and Latinos of Lenawee County. And we've had, you know, people say, why Latino? Where have you heard the term Latino come from when people describe themselves as that when they're from Mexican descent?
You know, I've asked them that question when I hear that, you know, we're Latino, I'm Latino, you're Latino. They don't really know where that came from. I don't know. I don't really, all of a sudden that Latino came and I think probably out in California, maybe Los Angeles or something, that somebody said, hey man, we must be Latinos. You know? And I think that word Latino started and it grew. And it took in the Latino population, which could be Cuban, it could be whatever, Guatemala. We've been through South America, my wife and I. And in Mexico, I heard the word, you know, down here, you got a lot of Latinos down there. And I think the word just took over and people started using it, and it has been, you know, what are you? And that word, to me, I've learned from my ancestors that what I am. You know, I just can't say I'm Latino, I'm anything else. I've always said, you know, I'm Mexican. Whenever I go to jobs and that, and I worked at 5 different factories already since I launched my business, and they say, are you whatever, you know? And I said, no, I'm Mexican. You know, oh, okay. So you're from Mexico? No, I'm Mexican American, yeah. And that's where I've learned to use the Mexican American, because once you say Mexican, they say, oh, you're from Mexico. Well, I'm from Mexican descent, but I am an American, born here, raised here. And a lot of these guys get a little irate sometimes. And I always tell them, I said, look, I've served my country twice already. You know, I've done a lot for my country. What have you done? So I am a Mexican American, so, and that kind of shuts him up for a while anyway. But, so it's quite a. I don't know where these words came from. I really don't. You know, Chicano. I think Chicano is just a word that, especially in Texas, where you use a lot of Tex-Mex. You know, the Tex-Mex language, where you instead of saying look at la camioneta, they say mira la troca, and troca is a truck. Troca. El boss, you know, the bus, el boss. This is all kind of but I think a lot of it, you know, comes in from the Spanish-speaking states, or we're looking at Texas, New Mexico, California, Arizona, where it's heavily populated, and somehow or another the word, someone starts it, and it gets started, and it seems to work. So Latino, that word, I remember people asking me, are you Latino? And I said, well, I'm part of that. Yeah, I'm part of that. I'm Mexican. You know, so Latino, I said, you know, could be anybody that's Latin that speaks Spanish. So they said, oh, okay. So that's, but it's hard to explain where it came from because I really don't know. And even if you look it up in the Mexican Webster dictionary, they don't have too many answers where it came from either. So yeah, it's crazy. I don't know.
Do you have anything else? Okay.
Well, I want to thank you. Thank both of you. It's a pleasure being here, and I hope that the things that you're doing, it's going to be great. I know it is. It's going to open up a lot of doors. I hope that the Mexican American people from the communities around come in and see what you're doing and what you've done. So I think it's great. Thank you.